This session we will cover the separate topic of the very important topic for the AWS, which is VPC, private cloud. So we will cover most of the important questions which is actually asked in the real world with the some scenario basis questions. Okay, so let's get started. So yeah, so we will start with basically the understanding of the VPC. So when AWS by default create the VPC, right? When we create any AWS accounts. So why do we need to create any additional VPC over there?
Okay. So basically VPC means virtual private cloud. Okay. And by default, AWS has created one single VPC. Name is a default, and this VPC has been created in all regions. Okay. Yeah. But the best recommendation is to create a separate new VPC, because default VPC is created all subnet in a public. So whenever you are going to launch any single resource, then it will be launched in a public. And in company scenario or in actual production environment or in company environment, so we usually create a public and private subnet. So to enhance security of our architectures and all. So this is the best recommendation way to create a custom VPC and public and private subnet as per our requirement, as per our CIDR block range. So we can decide all these things. So that's why we need to create a custom VPC.
Yeah. So basically we need a complete control over there. That's the reason we need a separate custom VPC, not the default one, because it's a shared resources, which AWS created. Yeah. Okay. So, so let's say you have a requirement. You got the new project and you got the new AWS account access over there. So as a best practices and the secure design the VPC architecture. So what component you will take to create the VPC architecture, and how you will design this with the consideration of the better security in the environment.
Okay. So first of all, when we got a requirement to create a VPC from the client side, okay. So from AWS side, we got two options, like create a VPC and create VPC and more. Okay, so we have currently two options. So using VPC only, we can create VPC, we can create manually subnet, we can create route tables, etc., etc. And using VPC and more options, we need to just mention the VPC name, like it will be auto-generated option. Like we need to mention the VPC name. We need to mention the CIDR block if you require, or it will be create automatically whatever they require, like the default range. And we can mention as a how many subnet should be in a public and how many subnet should be in private. And as per our graphical requirement, AWS will create automatically all the settings. Like no need to modify any route table, no need to assign any subnet in a route tables and all. So it will create automatically internet gateway, it will create automatically NAT gateway. And as for the architecture, like basically the best way to create, like to design the VPC is a public and private subnet. So the best recommendation is launch our web server in a public subnet and launch application database server and all other things which did not require the end user connectivity. So we should launch all these resources on a private subnet. Okay, so this is the basic recommended way. And for security regarding, we need to mention the like we can configure the custom NACL settings or NACL rules. And upon that, like we can create VPC endpoints, and also depend upon our requirement, we can design a custom architecture. So this is the best way to design in our project.
Okay, good. And that also there is option to the create the VPC pairing as well, if you have multiple VPCs over there. Okay. Suppose you design the VPC architecture with the two public subnets or two private subnets, right? So if you have any requirements such, it might be a rare case situation that you, when we normally launch any EC2 instance in the public subnets, that automatically gets a public IP, right?
Yeah.
It's not the elastic IP address. Yes, but if I have a requirement to disable that by default generated public IP, so how we can do this subnet level setting?
Okay. So just click on the left side, like just click on the subnet and just click on the action. So inside the action, there is an option like a subnet setting. And inside the subnet setting, we need to just enable or disable the auto assign public IP address. Okay. So if you want, then we can enable it. If you don't want, then just disable it, like uncheck these settings and save it. So whenever new resource will launch, automatically public IP will assign or not assign, depend upon. If we enable it, then it will assign. If we disable it, then it will not assign default IP address, public IP address.
Okay. Yeah, great. And we also, from their action button, we can also disable the DNS hostname, which is by default generated. Yeah. This requirement might be very rarely if in such a kind of project or sensitive information, in that situation, only we can implement that. Otherwise, we can go with the default one.
Yes.
Okay. So I have now a VPC created in the project. Okay. So now I want to monitor the VPC logs basically, where the traffic coming from, in out. So how we can enable the VPC logs?
Flow logs, VPC flow logs. So what is the use of this? Like to monitor the logs, like just take an example, we have launched multiple web servers on single VPC. And if you want to monitor which CIDR range or which public IP address or from which country we are getting the hit on that particular VPC or that particular servers or on that particular resources, then upon the flow logs, we can monitor it. If we want to restrict, if we want to block it, then according to the logs, we can block it in a NACL.
Yeah, correct. Okay. So when we create any VPC, let's say in that now AWS supported a new feature with auto generated, we can choose the options. But in the traditional earlier way, basically earlier generation, if you suppose create a VPC, it will only created the VPC basically. Okay, whatever we have specified the CIDR range over there. So apart from that, automatically what components it will create with the VPC?
Automatically.
Yeah. When we create any VPC with the particular CIDR range, it will create some components automatically. We don't need to basically create manually. There are some components. So what are they?
We need to create VPC, subnet, route table, gateway, and all.
Yeah, subnet part is we need to manually create actually. But when we
we need to manually create it.
But when we create the VPC, it will create automatically, one default security group, NACL layer over there.
Default route table.
Default
route table also.
Yeah. These three components it will create: security group, route table, and the one secure NACL layer.
Yes.
Yeah. So now, as I said earlier, we have one AWS account. Suppose we have one production account, and that has multiple VPCs configured for the dividation for the resources over there. And we have application in VPC A, let's say VPC A, and we have a database in VPC B. Okay, there are two multiple VPCs basically. So how we can connect each other with the private IP address? What things we need to configure there?
Okay, so there is a concept of VPC pairing. Okay.
Yeah.
So using VPC pairing, we can achieve this target. Like region to region, we can establish the connectivity. Even though account to account, we can establish the connectivity from A account to B account or A region to B region. Okay. So we need to just create one VPC pairing, and we need to just send a request to another account or another region, and just log into that particular region or account and accept this request. So once we accept this request, then connectivity will be established from A account to B account. Okay. Then we can access the resource by private IP address.
Okay. So what things we required to configure the VPC peering?
Basically, we require VPC ID first thing.
Yeah.
Most important is a VPC ID only, and we should know the account ID. Okay. Which account ID and the region. So which region we are going to establish the connectivity. And after that, once we create the VPC pairing, then we should approve this from the target account.
Okay. So suppose I have two VPCs in different account, but they have a same CIDR range. So will that possible to configure VPC peering?
In that case, no, because CIDR range should be different. Like in A account, we are using 192.168 range. Then in target account, it should not be use the same CIDR range.
Okay, it should be unique basically.
Yes, it should be unique.
Okay, great. Now suppose I have one production server, okay, EC2 basically, and one server is in a private subnet, not in the public subnet. So I got the requirement like I want to patch the server, by using enabling the internet connection, and the server is in private subnet. So what things I can configure to, so I can just patch that server?
Okay. So basically, you need to say like one EC2 server is launched in a private subnet, and you need to just patch it. Okay. Yeah. So private subnet means at the background side we have attached NAT gateway. Okay. So basically, NAT gateway has a functionality to access the internet only from server to server. So NAT gateway or the private EC2 server will not be able to access from outside, like from our laptop, from VPN connections and all. But this private subnet or private EC2 server can able to access the internet from server to server. So basically, we can just execute the command apt update command, apt upgrade command. So it will just update or it will install all the required packages from the internet without any issues. Okay. But only the thing is, server will not be accessible from outside.
Okay. So you will create NAT gateway for that.
Yes, NAT gateway.
So that NAT gateway should be attached to private subnet or public subnet?
Private route table, and this private subnet will be added into the route table.
Okay. Okay. So you have a public subnet and private subnet. So on what basis you will define this? That like this route table or this basically this subnet should be public and then the another one is private. So on what basis you will define this? I mean, how you can configure public and private subnet?
Okay, so basically at the backside, like if we want to identify the public subnet, then that means we need to create one route table, separate route table, and just associate this public subnet in that particular route table and attach an internet gateway into that route table. Like just take an example, we are going to just tag it as a public route. Okay, so the A subnet will be added in a public route table, and I will add an internet gateway into the A public subnet route table. And I will just mention forward route like 0.0.0/0 and just forward it to the internet gateway. So automatically, whenever the resource want to access the internet, then it will just hit to the route table and it will access the internet.
Okay. Great. So now let's say you have a defined VPC and you created any VPC subnet basically in that. So how much IP address by default AWS keep reserved for their use cases?
Okay, so by default, if you create a subnet, then by default, VPC will reserve nearly 5 IP address. Like take an example, like we are assigning 10.0.0.0. So it will be reserved for network address. Okay. Then 10.0.0.1, it will be assigned for VPC router. It will be reserved. Yes. 10.0.0.2, it will be reserved for DNS server. 0.3 for future use. And the last IP address is 0.255. So it will be reserved for network broadcast. Okay. So whatever the CIDR range, like 192.168 or 172, whatever the range. So last 0, 1, 2, 3, and 255. It will be reserved from AWS side.
AWS side. Okay. So in VPC, you might see the options like the DHCP option set. So what is the purpose of that?
Okay. The functionality of DHCP is like auto assign the IP address. Like basically DHCP is called as a dynamic host configuration protocol. Okay, so it will assign the IP address dynamically. Like whenever the resource will be launched in AWS, then DHCP has a functionality to assign IP address whenever the resource will be deleted, then DHCP has a role to delete that particular IP address. So this is the functionality of the DHCP.
Okay. Okay. As you I mentioned earlier, so you will set up for the during the VPC configuration, you will set up the NACL layer and all the stuff. So we also have a security group to when we configure the EC2 instance, we need to attach that security group. So what is the main difference between this NACL and the security group?
Okay. So basically, NACL means we are discussing NACL like from last 5 to 10 minutes. So basically, the long form of NACL is a network access control list, and SG is a security group. So basically, NACL is a first layer of the security. Like if we identify any particular IP address is hitting our web server or our VPC ID or our account lots of time, then we can block that particular IP address using NACL. And basically, NACL has a functionality to allow and deny rule. But in security group, we can able to allow only IP address. We cannot block it. But using NACL, we can allow and we can block it. So by default, NACL has 100, like 100 number of rules, like
Rules.
19, 100, and the rule name, like allow, and the star is a 4D9. If we want to block or if you want to allow the IP address, the main important rule is if we mention the lower number, then it will be highest priority. If we mention the max number more than 100, 101 and all, so it will has a low priority. So depend upon our priority, we can configure the allow and deny rule in an NACL. But in security group, we can allow the IP address, we can allow the port range. We can assign the security group to multiple instances, EC2 instance and all, the same security group. But for NACL, it's a unique for the subnet level or VPC level. So it will be unique rule for all the VPC.
Okay. Suppose in my production environment, I have one application servers and the database servers. So let's say now I'm not able to connect from application server to my database servers basically. So how to make the connectivity from application to database servers?
Okay. Application to database server.
Database server.
So I will just copy the private IP address of the application server, and I will whitelist the private IP address in a database security group. And if application is accessing 404 or any specific port in 80, 8080, whatever, then I will just allow this port in database security group. IP address, application IP address, and the port. So it will be accessible application to the database server.
Okay. So let's say you are managing the, you are the architecture and you are managing the complete project. You have a number of AWS accounts and you suddenly got the alert like for particular AWS accounts, you have a SSH port publicly open. So what process to you follow and you can just to resolve this alerts basically, if you got any alert for the SSH port publicly open?
SSH port is publicly open. So first of all, I will just search which security group is allow this port in publicly. First of all, I will identify it. I will just disable this 22 port, and I will just cross verify like which IP address we should allow. Like in company environment, we just allow the VPN IP address, only VPN IP address. So if you log into the VPN, then this server will be automatically accessible. So I will just enable the VPN IP address instead of 0.0.0 IP address.
Okay. One more thing. Suppose I have a I have a one production AWS accounts, and someone someone created any resources like EC2 instance or S3 bucket, and in this situation, as an architecture, I need to get the alerts if someone created the any resources in the my production account basically. So how you will configure this alert mechanism? So your junior member or any team member basically, without informing you, he just created the any EC2 instance or S3 bucket. or any resources basically. So how you will get this alert in that
Okay.
situation?
Yeah. So for alert perspective, we need to configure SNS, and if you want to monitor like which resource has launched these things, so we need to create a events in a CloudWatch. Okay.
Yeah.
So inside the CloudWatch events, we can we can specify if any single EC2 is launching, terminating, stopping, reboot, not a rebooting, like terminating and all. So on the basis of events, we can configure the CloudWatch events and just configure SNS like which employees want an email alerts and all. So just configure SNS event into the CloudWatch. So it will be give alerts.
Okay. Good. Now, no, if you have such a setup in your organization, like you have a production server or any set of resources created in the AWS accounts, okay, and you have some resources or setup you have in own data center here in company premises basically. So in short, you have a data center on in your premises, and you have also some application deployed on the AWS cloud. So how what services or which the basically provider features you will use to make a private connectivity between your on-premises to AWS cloud?
Yeah, okay. So basically, AWS has provided two services like VPN, virtual private network, and other thing is AWS Direct Connect. So the best recommended way is to AWS Direct Connect, like it will create a private tunnel from the on-premises to the public AWS cloud. So we need to just configure like which lease line is which lease line is we are using for data centers, and upon that like we need to just mention all the things in a AWS Direct Connect. So it will be create one private tunnel, and or we can just sync up all the data from on-premises to the AWS cloud, even though we can establish a connectivity from on-premises to the AWS cloud also.
Okay. So we have almost covered most of the questions on the VPC. Just I have one last VPC last question related to the features. So let's say sometimes when we create any Lambda functions or use any services, sometimes we get the limit exceed error in terms of when we using a Lambda function or creating any EC2 instance. So how we can check the reason behind this and how we can raise the request to increase the quota?
Yeah, okay. So the basically AWS has a intention to minimize the count of resources. Like sometimes the AWS account got hacked from the hackers.
Yeah.
So in that case, hacker will be launch our resources multiple times to increase the bill. To minimize this issue, AWS has given a restrictions to launch multiple resources at a single time. If we have completed this quota, then yes, we can just increase or we can extend that particular resource count quota. Like in AWS side, we have service quota service, and just click on that service. And whatever, if you want to increase the RDS count, like by default is a 40 count, we can launch RDS. So if you want to increase from 40 to 60, then just go on the service, click on the RDS service and mention the your quota count.
Yeah.
So depend upon that, it will be extend the quota.
Okay. Excellent. And we have already created one session day one, which user very which are very likely on that the real time interview sessions basically. I hope this will also help the users to get more insights, and definitely they will get a job on their track. So we hope that, and we will connect another one with the more helpful session as a part of the interview series.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Rajesh.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.